Hi everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Development Armory, episode 20. We're going through a series of understanding the different generations of people that youth leaders interact with. Today we'll be hearing about understanding Generation X leadership. I hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, we are going to get started now. Good afternoon and welcome back to the Leadership Development Armory. For those of you who don't know, my name is Summer Bussey and I'm the Territorial Christian Education Director for the Youth Department here. And for the Armory, this is our fourth season, which is really exciting.
Yeah, we got it's often right.
For the last few weeks, we've been going through a series about understanding the different generations of people groups that people might interact with youth leaders. We have heard about understanding Generation Alpha, millennial parents, and today we're going to be learning about Generation X leadership. As a reminder, our overall objective is to create a space for diligent learning in order to develop and equip youth leaders. But we want this to be a safe space to learn new things, ask questions, and make connections with fellow leaders in the Salvation Army. Today, our presentation is going to be Understanding Generation X Leadership with Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Wild. And he is coming from a Salvation Army leadership perspective, and he's going to discuss how his generation views youth ministry and what they expect from you as a youth leader. And I am going to ask Major Emmanuel, can you open us up in prayer?
Sure. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you for just this moment so we can pause to reflect on the ministry that we have in the Salvation Army. We thank you for the opportunity to learn and to hear more from Colonel Ivan. We ask that you may help us to learn everything we can today, and not just that, but be able to apply it locally in our communities. Thank you for everybody on this call and those that are unable to be here so far. Thank you for the ministry that they're part of, reaching in the communities they serve and discipling young people in their core. We thank you, Lord. We pray for all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Okay, you can take it away, Colonel Ivan.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm actually calling in from Hawaii, so aloha. But anyways, yeah, this is just a really interesting topic, and I'm really kind of trying to process how to kind of talk about it. And I think it really a good way is more in the engagement with the Q&A, but I'm just going to give you my perspective coming from as a Gen X. As you know, I'm at the very early stages of Gen X. I'm 58. I was born in 66. And now my grandchildren are the ones that are in youth programs, kind of the elementary age youth programs. And so it's kind of an interesting perspective. And I think communicating, I think the biggest thing, I think there's kind of three things that are helpful in working with the Generation X grandparent, officer, and to build that good relationship with them. And I think number one, and it's not necessarily in the priority order, is that you have to understand is the digital divide. I think that's one. The Gen X, we kind of came into the digital divide and realizing that those generations under, the way we communicate is a little different. For Gen X, like myself, I'm very much more comfortable with direct communication via kind of like, email. What I noticed was when I was the divisional commander in Del Oro, and I was trying to build relationships with officers, I started getting texts from some officers, and I viewed that as just kind of a point of conversation, and they were viewing it as an actual formal way of communicating. And so I was waiting for a follow-up with like a direct email. It was a question they asked if they could do something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they would just casually text me. And I was waiting for them to send me a direct email, a little bit more formal, and they were waiting for me to respond. And so that's what I mean by that divide. And so there was this misunderstanding. Well, the DC never responds to me. And I'm like, well, you never asked me anything. And then I realized, well, I texted you that. Well, okay, that's kind of on the fly. I need a direct email. So I think number one is is direct communication, and being very direct. And the next thing that I would say too is the language divide. And I'm not talking about slangs of those types of things. I'm just talking about the language. I'll give you an example. Is in this younger generation, ministering to children, maybe the junior high age, the language that is a lot of times used that in my generation, we never use it, is that around that of mental health. Mental health is a real issue, a real concern. But what do we mean by what we say? My granddaughter, who's 8 years old, she had to do a couple different tasks. There was like soccer practice, then go to the Corps for an event or something like that. And she goes, this is causing me anxiety. And she's 8 years old. Now, she's picked up on that language. Was it really causing her anxiety? Probably not, but she's picked up on the language that's being used today. And for me, as a Gen X, I'm like, well, just get over it. This is life. But her mom was the one who was having the anxiety because of running around all over the place. And so there's just that language and understanding. I was recently at the youth councils, or DYR, in one division, and they did a great job. And they said that if you, they presented it this way about, they had a couple of officers ready to walk alongside and just be present and provide a safe place for people to talk to them. And they said, because some of you, this is what I quote, some of you may be overwhelmed by this weekend, and we have a mental health bags, first aid kit kind of bags, and we have a safe place for you. And so I think as if I was the divisional leader, I am the Corps officer, I would want to know, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because to me, I'm like, are we going to have like counseling sessions with kids? Are we anticipating that the weekend is overwhelming, or the meetings, maybe things will conjure up in their life? And so communication is super important. By what are you trying to do? So if you want to win me over, is that direct communication, and what do you mean by what you say? And so that was a new one for me. So these are just like all the different things. And I think this is important too, for like DYSs, those who are doing youth rallies, is when you're talking with the Corps officers, is to give good explanations by these types of things. We're going to have, we're going to have a safe place for kids to share in case there's any mental health issues. Well, that's, for me as a Gen Xer, that's like scary. That's like, whoa, what are we talking about? But in today's world, again, with my granddaughter as an example, the words around mental health are used a lot more in familiarity as opposed to me. And so I'm thinking more clinical, and they're thinking more social interaction. And so I think that's what I mean by that language divide. And so a Gen X person like myself needs really direct communication and understanding. And I think those are some of the things that happen. I think another way is, for me as a Gen Xer, having to adapt on how to encourage officers. And so what we would think as encouragement as an officer versus what a millennial might need as an encouragement are two different things. I would, when I was a young lieutenant, just being prayed for or saying, hey, you're doing a good job is all I needed. I think the work ethic is different, not work harder, less, but the direction given. I think Gen Xers tend to be more independently in working, whereas the other generations want more teamwork, want to come alongside, and want to take on specific causes, and are very temporal. And so when it comes to encouragement, is whatever feedback I got, that was encouragement. I think when I discovered with some of the younger officers is they want feedback, but I have to be very careful on how I phrase the feedback, because in the feedback, they want also kind of encouragement and affirmation. And so I have to be careful how I phrase it. And so I think it's just that understanding of how we communicate with each other across these generational divides. So those are just some of the things that, for me, coming as a leader, as a Gen X, and trying to work with officers. But I think number one is the communication of directness and explaining what is that you're doing. What do we mean by a mental health space? Again, I just use that as an example. What does that encompass? Don't assume that the Gen Xer understands all of that. And so those are some of the things that are very, very, very helpful. So those are the basic things I think for myself, kind of leading more and more officers that are in different congregations, different generational ages. Yeah, so those are kind of things. I really want to hear more of your questions. That's why I didn't really want to spend a lot of time, but just kind of give you my background on that, and just my things that I've run into is to let you know the communication piece is probably the biggest. So I just kind of want to open up for questions. I'd rather have the dialogue.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So you said that when you're talking to other generations, they're looking for affirmation, but you also have to kind of discipline and those kinds of things. How do we as a generation then address you if you're looking for certain things? Or like, how do we address you in those ways, I guess?
So
Yeah,
community-centric giving that are going to not require that level of accountability and transparency into your organization and its impact.
Yeah,
That's okay. That's not with the judgment, but that's understanding where you're at and what your kind of long-term limitations are going to be. Size of your organization, and maybe that.
Let me answer Jillian's question, and I think then someone else had another question. So I want to make sure we cover the question. So the question that was asked is addressing me from that perspective. I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought. Jillian, can you repeat the question? Because I got two different questions. Can you kind of restate that question?
Yeah, so if you're addressing us in a way that is to help affirm us, because that's what we need is affirmation. Even if we need discipline, we still need that affirmation. How do we then address you when we have a conflict or something like that? That's kind of my question, is how do we then address your generation if we have a conflict?
Yeah, good one. So I think is let me just give an example. So I read the surveys, the leadership surveys, and in those surveys, a common thread that we'll see is more pastoral care. More pastoral care. We need to be encouraged in more pastoral care. As we go around to the reviews, we actually look at what do you do to communicate that with your officers, and every division has some form of it. I would say, again, is what do you mean by pastoral care? I think it's okay to ask the question. So like in that, what does pastoral care look like for you? And so whatever the conflict is, I think it's good to explain what it is that you're looking for, because as the leader, by sending out a card or making a phone call, we're viewing that as pastoral care, and I think what we need is what is it that you exactly need by these things. And so in a time of conflict, on the feedback is ask specifically for those things that you are in conflict with. So that I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really giving clarity and asking the question. It's okay to ask the question. This is what I need. And I think sometimes that's what's missed. I think it's sometimes assumed. A quick example is again, the officer called and had a baby. We went and visited the baby and it brought flowers, and it was an officer, they had a child, we did all that. And in the survey, when it talked about pastoral care, it actually mentioned our divisional leaders came to visit us in the hospital, but we never had a formal pastoral care visit. So the question is, what do you mean by pastoral care visit? Because in my language, going to a visitation, going to those types of things is a formal pastoral care visitation. But there was that gap. So that's what I mean by being so specific. And then the next question was, I think it was the church.
I think Captain Christie, yeah, did you have something? Sorry, I just was muting everybody because there's lots of sounds happening. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself. But
it wasn't me. I didn't have a question. Sorry.
Okay.
Jillian, did that answer your question? I'm not quite sure if I answered it correctly.
So that part, but then like, how do we best address leaders if we feel like we might not be getting that? So you said like clarification and that kind of stuff, but what if it's difficult? I guess is the question. Like, how do we come to you? Would your generation rather an email about it? Would your generation rather have a discussion about it? Like, what's the first step to that, I guess is my question.
That's okay. Yeah, I would say more often than not, face to face, and then followed up directly with email. I think those probably go hand in hand for my generation. Whether one goes before the other, that's fine. But I think my generation definitely likes the more the didactic approach. So conversationally, yeah, I'm very relational. But it's the follow-up so that I know clearly what it is that you're asking for or is needed. So conversation, yes, but then a follow-up to close the gap. And I think that's what I would be approaching, asking of you. Whatever our conversation is, let's follow up with an email so we make sure we hit the bullet points. So, but don't post it on social media.
Thank you, Jillian, for that question. Does anybody else have any questions for Colonel Ivan?
I have a question. I know that you did a lot of surveys and you might not know the answer to this, but as far as officers and out there, are most of us is there a lot of Generation X? Because I barely found out that I'm Generation X. I don't really know, where everybody lines, and that's not how I think. When I meet people, I'm not thinking, oh, this is whatever this conversation that we're having. But I do go to people instead of email if they're in this office, especially like if we're in the same building. I would like to go and just talk to them instead of emailing, because I think we get lost in translation with that. And if something's not communicating well, I just pick up the phone and, let's talk about it instead. But do you find it that we as officers communicating to the field, from the field to our leadership, do we get lost in translation in the things that we're trying to communicate to each other because of the generations, I guess?
Yeah, I think so on some aspects, and I think what's important is what do we mean by what we say? So when we use, again, I'm just going back to when we talk about mental health, or we talk about needing rest, when we talk about sabbatical, when we talk about workload or overwhelming, what do we mean by that? What's what's the threshold? So I think things do get lost in translation. I think that's why a face-to-face relational is super important. But if we want to accomplish the task, if we're trying to go on to the next thing, well, how can we make resolution? I think definitely my age, majority of divisional leaders that are more my age like to fix it. I think we're in more of a fix it mode as opposed to just trying to talk it through. So we'll, especially if those who are relational like me, will spend hours talking it through, but then I'm going to want resolution on how to fix it to move forward. What are the 3 things now we can do in order to make it a better workplace or a better communication style? But absolutely things get lost in translation by what is assumed and what is meant by what is said. And I think those are really, really, again, I get a text, they're assuming that is a done deal. I'm thinking it's casual. And so there's that gap there. True story. So for those that are officers, when a baby is born in the family, where do we get that information from? And I asked our person who enters what's called the officer management system, that we put in everything about the officer's life in there so they can get paid and all that. I said, well, when the baby's born, how do we even know? And they said, well, when the bulletin goes out or it's on Facebook. So right, because the social media is so quick and all that they actually look there first before actually receiving an official email from the division or the officer. And so and then we follow up on it. It was kind of said in gist, like a bit of tongue in cheek, but that's the reality that we live in. And so things do get lost in translation. So
I'll ask the question, what do you hope to see in like the next 10, 15 years in youth ministry as like a leader in the Salvation Army? Like, what are kind of like your hopes for what you want to see in our youth leaders and in our youth?
I would say in our youth leaders is probably, and again, I'm not quite sure the priority list, but in definitely youth leaders is a good biblical theological understanding of who we are as Christians. And I think that it's obvious, and especially in probably the last 5 to 8 years, probably even longer, there's a lot more politics and those types of things invaded within our theology. It's shaping our theology when our theology, our biblical understanding, should shape our views. And so why it's important to have dialogue, why it's important to have safe places to iron sharpens iron, to look at all the different opinions and voices. But I think having a firm biblical foundation first, that's where we start. That's the compass. And then we move forward from there. So number one, that. And then to the discipling model. And I think we've struggled I think all churches struggle in true discipleship. And I think that's one area. We have discipleship programs and we do discipleship material, but really taking discipleship, to that one-on-one focus and really holding each other accountable in that discipleship model. So I would definitely want to see that moving forward. Is more biblical literacy, I guess I'd put the thing, but not just biblical literacy, theological literacy that's Christ-centered. That would be one. And then the second one would be being innovated, innovation, right? I think that's huge, is how do we constantly connect with that next generation, whatever one we're trying to reach, and not to be scared of that. Like, I hate using the term, the cliche, let's think outside the box, but I think we have to be innovative on how do we take this message of Christ and make it relevant and contextual to those who we're trying to reach without compromise. And I think that's it, but empowering our young people in that direction. So those are probably the top two. I think from the Salvation Army standpoint is how do we become more self-sufficient and not in that discipleship, so that we are not enabling our young people, but rather we are helping them become self-sufficient, even when it comes to just, I'll just use an example. You know, unless we, I'll be honest, unless we pay for it, they won't come. Right. And so how do we create that ownership in the programs, ownership in the programs? I had an officer who you know, loved to do pastoral care, and they just took out a lot of people for lunch and coffee and things like that. And that's wonderful, but it's easy to be generous with somebody else's money. If you truly love the person and you're truly living a life of sacrificial giving, then perhaps maybe use your own money and show how much you love someone, right? I mean, it's a fine line, but I'm talking about extremes. So those are the types of things that I would like to see.
Okay, so we have a few questions in the chat. Captain Ernie is asking, do you think that current developed programs with an, sorry, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
okay.
Okay. Do you think that the current programs may, with the updates since the 90s, fit to the current generation's ability to grasp or grow from these materials or programs, based off of the way this current generation thinks, learns, and engages? I think he's asking, do you think that our programs may be a little out of date, because they're kind of built towards the 90s kids?
Yeah, I think definitely some of the materials. I think materials always need to be constantly be updated to address the thing. But at the heart of it, I think it really comes down to the user of material and the leaders of programs to make it relevant, right? But I think that's where we need to constantly look at the materials and update them as needed. The unfortunate reality within the Army, and this is something that I think we as leaders need to keep pushing forward, is by the time we revamp something, because of the many multiple steps it has to go through, by the time you revamp it, it's, you know, things change so quickly. But I think there's good signs of it. I mean, I think of what you guys have done with the Bible Bowl. I'm old school. I love the slapping of the table and for Bible Bowl, but doing the Kahoot style of Bible allows a greater space for those who are more savvy with their phones to participate. And I think you probably get more participation. Again, I think that's a quick adapting. I think we just need to adapt quicker. But as far as, I think it really comes down to the user of the material, of how we make it relevant. Because at the very bottom, what counts is relational, being prepared, being relational, providing quality, and really loving people. And those things are going to attract I think those are going to attract more than just the material. So.
Yeah, and even just like with all of the material that we have, like Core Cadets has been designed for us, right? And for our context. But there's a lot of materials that are out there that, like, even though they're like high quality materials, like our job as leaders is to vet them and ensure alignment with what we believe as well. So I think like what you're saying is that it really is up to the person who's leading to take the initiative to go through and to look at the content ahead of time and make sure that it's catered not just to what we believe, but also to the kids that they're serving as well.
Yeah.
We have a question from Captain Jillian who says, since mental health is becoming more talked about, what are we as the Salvation Army leadership doing to make sure that we have the resources needed for camps, retreats, after school programs, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's where the material comes in, as far as how to is looking at that. And then again, going back to my earlier thing, what is meant by what is said in that, you know, because we have to be very careful when dealing with people, if we're trying to address on things on mental health and we're not clinical professionals ourselves. And so there's that fine. It's like, even when I was a counselor, you know, I was a camp counselor. I was not a psychological counselor. And so we had to be very careful of not crossing over into trying to be a therapy counselor as a camp counselor, right? I think it's something that we have to really, and I would agree, I think what Jillian was saying is, what are we doing? I think we have to really look at all these angles of where kids are in the mental health today. What is being discussed in culture? What is being shared at schools? How are schools and organizations addressing it? And then we have to kind of develop a practice that is helpful. As far as material, I think that's a tough one. I think that's going to take professionals to really help guide us in, and how do we address it and how we provide for it. And I think then it comes down to training. How do we train our staff, our camp staff, to look for signs, and then getting them the reference and referrals that they might need, as opposed to trying to take it on ourselves in a 5-day, period at camp.
Captain Christie asked, have we ever considered having all of the officers take a personality or leadership test so that we can be better partnered in regard to having associates or assistants, or at least know what our leadership strengths and weaknesses are to help us strengthen those weaknesses?
I mean, I think over the time, in different aspects, we've had done personality trait trainings, different officers' councils have. I don't think we've done it territorially as one big push. It'd be interesting to do that. I think there's some great things that we can learn from that. What are our core competencies that are needed to be a core officer? What are core competencies that are needed to be a leader? And do I have those, or which ones do I need to develop in order to be a better officer to serve the community? But I would love to see a whole territorial wide one, but they have been done at more the local level. And I think that's something that you could bring up to your division, maybe something that you do in your divisional officers' councils, and then you could have the time and space to go over what is meant by all the different personality trait profiles, whether you use the DISC, whether you use some of the other ones that are out there. So I would definitely suggest that you bring it up to your divisional leadership and ask them to do it for an officers' councils.
Before I do the other question in the chat, does anybody want to unmute and ask a question?
I do.
Uh-oh.
I have two questions. One of them is very easy. The first one is I know, Colonel, you've served as a divisional commander in 2 different divisions. How do you define success in ministry within the division or within the respective corps?
I mean, there's tools that we have and use that I don't think are all of it, but I think what we need to do is look at what is our recording mechanism. What is the mechanism that we use to assess data and information? And in the Salvation Army, one of them is statistics. It's not all about statistics, but statistics, the narratives, and reporting. But how, as a leader, what I would define is success is, what is your engagement? If you're the corps officer in my command, what is your engagement in the various programs and activities that we have? Not that you're doing everything, but are you sending kids to camp? Are you participating? Do you have different youth programs going on? Where are you engaged, and what is that engagement in different areas? So I would be looking for success as far as is engagement and the fruit of that engagement, not numbers per se, but the fruit of that. What's actually happening? What's the narrative of that? And that's how I would view success. There was 2 questions. I think you're muted.
Man, after all these years, I'm still talking on mute.
It's just not my generation. It's your generation as well.
Yeah, actually found out I'm Gen X when I was preparing for this, so I'm closer to you than the ones after me. My second question, which might be a little tougher, is in leadership. Sometimes I know, speaking as a leader, it's easier to look at the people I serve or serving alongside me to say, this is what they need to do to get better. As a Gen X leader, what do you need to do to adjust in your leadership to connect better with the people serving, or the younger people, younger officers, younger youth directors?
Yeah, I think I've had to learn how to adapt to the more individual personality of where those officers are. So I kind of use the analogy of it's really about being more of a coach, I think, and a cheerleader. And I think those are the two terms that I've had to use in encouraging to getting the most out of the officer for their own well-being, as well as the ministry to which God has called us. Right. So and so I need to adapt to, well, how can I get the most out of you? When I was a lieutenant, you would just get a blanket email that you needed to bring, 10 kids to camp or whatever it is. You will bring 25 people to Congress. You will have this and you will do that. I don't think that is the way that as a leader today, I have to approach it. I have to approach it more of what can you do, and then try to hold you accountable to that. So last year, you didn't bring any kids to camp. This year, how can we help you to bring kids to camp? And I think it's that constantly coming aside in encouragement. That's both the coach as well as the cheerleader, and to celebrate. I think this is another big thing that I've had to do more of, is to celebrate with the officer, even what maybe we'd consider a small success. If you wanted to bring 5 kids to camp and you brought 1, well, let's celebrate the 1, and how can we bring next year work to bring 2? So adapting to the need of the officer, of what gets the most out of them, is what I found to be most helpful. But I really had to adapt to it.
Thank you.
We have another question in the chat that says, how can we get a better connection from Gen X leadership to the new generation, which I assume is the Gen Z, Gen Alpha generation?
Yeah, I think it would be kind of cool to do interaction focus groups. I think that would be one way. Because I think it's a little twofold. I think it's twofold. I think you have the generational aspect, but you also have the positional aspect too. Is that as a divisional leader or territorial leader, you're a step removed. Officers are, field officers, DYSs are way more connected to that. But I think invitation to come alongside. That's why I think it's so important that territorial leaders are invited to go to DYRs and to interact and things like that. Still be invited. I got invited to speak at a core, I see right here on the screen from Redondo. I think it's important. It's hard, but I think what we could do though more formally to answer the question is to set up ways and times to have interaction, face-to-face focus groups with specific questions, so that there's understanding, so there's listening on the leadership from the youth. But I think it needs to be directed, not just a free-for-all. I think it's good to have a specific topic, very specific things, and then ask for that engagement. I think that would really go far. So I'm open for it. So invite me. I'd love to sit in a focus group and hear from what young people have to say, and officers as well.
Anybody else have any questions? Feel free to put it in the chat or just to unmute yourself and to ask a question.
I have a question. This is as a younger leader, as a younger officer, I think something that I'm curious about is just how, I guess, is it Gen X, the older that we're talking, how our leadership views the younger generation? Because I feel like, at least I've heard, not necessarily about our leadership, but in general, like the older generations tend to kind of look down on Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and like even at our DYR in California South, it was just like, oh, I've never been more encouraged by a generation before, but the older generations don't always see that. And so I guess I'm just curious from a leadership point of view, like how can we clear up some of those misconceptions? Or is it just our generation that thinks there's those misconceptions about us, or is there? I just wanted to ask that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's anytime there's perception, there's a percentage of it that's a reality, right? And so I don't think you're misled. I think there is some of that. I think stereotypically kind of generalization from, quote, my generation, not just within officership, but just as a whole, because you hear people say this is going to offend people, but this is what is said, is that, oh, that really younger generation is a very weak-minded generation. And that's not helpful coming from any type of leader to project that. But I'm just saying those are the things that you can hear. I think the way to clear it up again is engagement and listening. I don't think from any generation to any generation, I don't think there's that much difference. I think it's the way that we see the world, the way we interact with the world, and what has shaped us in the world. I mean, what has shaped me and my upbringing is different from what's shaped my children, politically, social, economically, sports, pop culture, all of that. Big shout out to the 80s though, because 80s music still played all the time. But I don't think you're misrepresenting it. I think that there is that bias. And how is it cleared up? I really believe it's the interaction, finding ways to what I would call multi-generational ministry. I think we try to silo too much. I think this is just me personally now. I think we try to silo it too much with youth ministry, children's ministry, young adult ministry, men's ministry, women's ministry, and they all have their place. But one should not be trumped over the other. And I think we also have to realize, how do we have multi-generational worship? How do we have multi-generational biblical teaching? Yes, we need, yes, we need to break out Sunday school so they can, learn at their pace and those types of things. It's good to have men's camp. It's good to have women's camp. But I think when it comes to community and family, I think how do we integrate generational ministry? And I think that's a good starting point. What a powerful thing to have grandparents interacting with grandchildren age. That I think that is just beautiful, and things like that. So that's how I would try to address it.
Thank you for that question, Monique. Anybody else have any questions? I can ask, what are specific things that you would be interested in being able to connect with? I know that you had mentioned the focus groups and the multi-generational worship, but what other kinds of ideas are things that you as a Generation X leader would like to be asked to do to participate more?
Yeah, I think like I said, the ones that I mentioned, I think another one would be kind of cool. Like one thing that's been a blessing to me, and I've been fortunate able to do it, but I think it could be transposed, is going on like a project mission-based trip that's more multi-generational. I think I've had on the personal side an opportunity to do kind of mission trip, just me and my daughter. And that is super powerful, that personally. But I think it would be really good, like, you have service corps. I don't know how this would work, but I'm volunteering. But, is to do a mission trip, to do a project that has that crossover, where the Gen Xer or myself is not the leader, right? Is the participant, and still allow the whatever generation level to be the leader of that project and participate. Because I think what happens is because of my age or position, that when you either you go to just simply observe, or if you're going to engage, then leadership is automatically tossed onto you. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think we have to learn to lead as well as follow. A good leader also is a good follower. And so I think to kind of reverse those roles, to find ways to do that. I'm not talking about, I'd love to have somebody be the personnel secretary for a day, a month, a year, so I can take a sidestep. But what would it look like? Just use the service corps as an example. What would it look like to go on a service corps opportunity and myself fall under the leadership of someone that's 25 years old? I think I could learn a lot. And I think and then that 25-year-old may also then look to, well, how would you handle this? I think creating a space where those things could overlap would go a long ways.
Any other questions? We have 15 minutes left. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself.
While we're waiting, I just want to follow up on that. Great question from Monique there. The reason why we've been doing this series called Understanding and looking at all of the generations, it's not just looking at statistics or what the characteristics are, but it's to better understand one another as a full army, because we work with people that are much older than us, same age as us, younger than us. And if the only descriptions we have are negative, then how can we reach those people, or how can we serve alongside people? So our hope as a youth department is that we're understanding these generations so that we can understand one another as ministry partners, as people that are seeking to live out the mission of the Salvation Army, to preach the gospel, to meet human needs. So this is not just, hey, you check off, I understand generations, but how does that impact our ministry locally? How does that help me with the people that are above me? How does that help me with the people and the same level as being in the people that I'm serving? So that's the hope. So I'm so excited that we're having these, and so many of you showed up today. Maybe we should have Colonel Wild out all the time.
Happy to answer any questions. While you're thinking of a question, I know we got time, there's a few minutes left. I want to say, and this is that how encouraged I am when I do travel and get to DYRs and young adult retreats, and even doing divisional reviews and hearing the reports. The one thing that I would say is that I've seen is the passion that's in the term when we say younger officers, younger generation, however we want to say that, is the passion, and that to me is super encouraging. And so I think as a leader, how do I come alongside that and coach and give direction to that passion, and so that we can further the mission of what our calling is. And so I just want to encourage everyone on that. That'd be the one word that just over the last couple of years that I've seen, is just the passion that people have for the ministry that they're called to. It's just amazing. And the innovation that does come out of that. So I think that's great. I'm gonna give one quick illustration of that passion. And it's of course, I'll have to share from where I was in Southwest. Big shout out to the Southwest people on here. But the young people, a core closed. And I got a letter when I first arrived saying, would you come and meet us? We would like to talk to you about what's happening in the area where the core closed. So I drive to the building that's closed, and it was the parking lot. And I was expecting to meet someone that was kind of a young adult, maybe, in their 20s, 25 in the 30s. And the person who wrote to me was 14. And this 14-year-old reached out to want to keep the core going. This core had closed, but they kept the ministry going. These were teens. One was 21, the rest were teens. And they still did VBS on their own in the apartment complex next door to the building. And then, so I met them, and long story short, and I praise God for, again, this is the passion. I want to give a big shout out to the churches, is that they came alongside and stepped in as well. And a lot of those kids are part of the Tucson M5 Corps. And that's what I mean. I needed to adapt. I needed to go hear their story. And I could have easily said, well, the Corps was closed, whatever. We just don't have the funds and we don't have the money. But I had to be willing to adapt and go listen to the story. And I think if the one thing I did right was I listened to their story. I don't know if I got it right on how we were making that transition and what we were doing, but I think that's huge. So for me, I need to hear the story, and I think this younger generation, they like to share the narrative and the story. When I came from, when I was a lieutenant, it wasn't really sharing the narrative; it was sharing more of the numbers and what was been accomplished. And I've had to adapt to really hear the story and move forward. direction.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So if anybody has a question, now is your time. Okay, we have one on the chat. How can we deal with the younger generations that are always on their cell phone? And in our Gen X, we see it as a distraction or disrespectful during our church service and discipling.
Yeah. Let's stop paying for their cell phones. I've tried to wrestle with this. On the one hand, it's to find ways to engage it so to make it useful, such as, use a simple illustration as Kahoot, or engaging that way. But I would just be honest, and just say, hey, for this next hour, we're just going to put our cell phones away, including mine. Let's all put them on the table. Let's all do it together, right? I think it's just taking those small steps, and doing that, because I think I kept thinking, if I was at DYS, what would I do now? Would I be brave enough to say we're not having any cell phones for the whole summer, right? At first, you're going to get a lot of pushback, but I would imagine that after a time period, people realize they don't miss their cell phones as much as they think they would. But I would do small steps. So if you're doing the Bible study, if you're doing the worship, say, hey, let's just together, including myself, let's put all our cell phones on the phone. Let's put our cell phones in the offering plate. Let's give it an offering to the Lord, right? And have a separate offering plate for worship. I think there's some creative ways that you can do it. But you've got to include yourself. I think that's one thing that you have to do. You can't just dictate. I think you have to participate.
Thank you. I'll ask one final question.
Yep.
In the midst of all of the differences between each of the generations, what is the thing that you really hope remains, that like gets passed down? Like if you had to like pick, what would you say you really want all of the generations to remember?
I would think, I think we remember I would call it the oral tradition of our testimony, of our what Christ has done in my life, to pass that on to the next generation. I want my kids to know my testimony. I want my kids to know how Christ saved me through my actions, but the oral tradition. So I think passing down the oral tradition of the salvation story and then lived out. I think that would be the one constant that I would love to see.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time in your busy schedule to come and meet with us and answer all of our questions and share about Generation X leadership. Next, in 2 weeks, we're gonna do Understanding Gen Z. We had to push that one back like 4 weeks ago now. So just keep on the lookout for the next set. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a good rest of your week. Thank you so much, Colonel Ivan. Have a great rest of your day.